Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Ghosts I Have Been by Richard Peck. Our heroine Blossom is determined to retrieve the belongings and the reputation and the self-confidence of her friend Miss Dabney, who has just been bilked and terrified by a shyster seance holder. Chapter 9. I liked to freeze before I raised Alexander. Whistles and soft calls did nothing. He must have a wondrous clear conscience to sleep that deep. A handful of gravel from the drive finally brought him around. His hair was on end when he threw up the sash and peered out. I'd scared the daylights out of him. Ever since he saw that ghost in his barn, he's been nervous of night sounds. When he saw it was me, he started to shut the window, but I hauled off like I would throw more gravel. "Put on some clothes and come down, because me and you have got some business." I yelled softly for fear of raising his mother, who was a terror. Alexander took his time dressing, as I knew he would. Presently he stepped out the back door in a mackinaw and knickers with boots laced. I was glad he'd dressed warm, for I'd have sent him back if he hadn't. "Well, Blossom, what now?" He swaggered over my way. "And make it snappy, 'cause tomorrow's a school day and I need my rest." I didn't dignify this greeting with an answer. I bided my time, for I was about to play on a weakness of Alexander's, one of several. There was no point asking him to stick up for the rights of a poor old lady like Miss Dabney. Chivalry is dead, and Alexander's the proof. So I said, "You know how to drive an automobile, or don't you?" I knew he once served a short apprenticeship at the Apex garage. Consequently, he thought he was the last word in auto mechanics, though he had been sent away from the garage in disgrace. "You get me out of a warm bed to ask fool questions. You'll go too far one of these days, Blossom." "I will go far, all right," I agreed, "but answer my question." "I can drive anything on four wheels. My dad owns a Mercer, you know. I got no business with your pa. Can you drive an electric?" "Miss Dabney's, you mean?" he said, suddenly wise. "You aim on stealing it?" "I aim on keeping it from getting stolen. It's setting unprotected in front of the Oddfellows Hall, and this town is full of thugs and lowlifes with no respect for property, the same type that pushes over privies on Halloween." He let that pass. "Why doesn't Miss Dabney drive it home herself?" "Because she's at death's door this minute, suffering a nasty shock." "What could shock her?" I explained on our way down to the Oddfellows Hall. "But only if you're sure you can drive an electric auto. I wouldn't want it turned over in a ditch." "Come on," Alexander said importantly, "before we raise my folk with all this jabbering." He paced along ahead of me. Still, I managed to tell him all about Professor Regis and the spirit Sybil and what a fake seance was. He showed interest in how the professor took valuable items off the public. He mentioned several times that if Miss Dabney and me had kept our minds off the spirit world like he did, we wouldn't have got into this mess. But he was listening all right. "What makes you so sure this Sybil you're talking about isn't a genuine spirit?" he finally had to ask. "Because I didn't need my second sight to see her. I seen her like everybody else with my regular eyes. People with the gift like you and me, Alexander, can tell the difference easy." I paced along a step nearer him, and he didn't seem to mind. "There's nothing darker than a town at 2 in the morning. When we drew nigh the hall, the Pope Detroit parked out front looked like a big black parcel cast in shadow." "I'll have to spark it to start the thing," Alexander explained. "Then if the batteries aren't down, there'll be enough juice to drive it to Miss Dabney's." I let him fiddle because I hadn't lured Alexander out of bed just to take care of an automobile. I wanted him with me to scout around in the Oddfellows Hall and to have a good look at that double-door cabinet. The auto was just an excuse I knew Alexander would fall for. He had the lid off the battery box and was learning about electric power as he went. Pretty soon I said, "You any good at forcing doors?" Alexander's head rose up. "What kind of doors?" "Oh, like that there door in the Oddfellows Hall." "Why do we want to do any such a fool thing as that? It's against the law. So's robbing the public at a seance." I was another 5 minutes convincing Alexander to force the door with a tire iron from Miss Dabney's toolkit. I could have forced it myself, but if we were surprised by a night watchman, I saw no advantage in being the one holding the tire iron. Many's the far-fetched appeal I had to make to Alexander's manhood before I convinced him we were going to climb the dark stairs in a dark building at the darkest hour of night. There's a hint of a real haunt around, you wouldn't have seen Alexander for dust. But the notion of breaking and entering appealed to him. After much muttered back-talk, he took on the door of the hall with the tire iron. The sound of the padlock dropping on the step rang out. Everything's noisier at night. As we felt our way up the stairs, Alexander remembered his manners and let me go first. It was dark as a pocket up there, but I was easy in my mind, thinking that we two were the only ones in the place. There was a small vestibule at the top. Professor Regis had not thought to remove the bulb from the socket there. When I turned the switch, a wedge of light fell across the seance room. All the chairs stood empty, like leggy spiders. Light struck the cabinet beyond the table. Something held me back then, and I do not mean Alexander's cold hand plucking at my sleeve. On my own, I'd have retraced my steps, and I admit it. But I tiptoed across the room, shadowed by Alexander. When we stood before the cabinet, I could all but hear Professor Regis' conniving voice calling for the spirit of Sybil. I tried to pull the doors open, but they were locked from inside. Running a hand over the smooth panels, I discovered a hairline break in the wood. I applied pressure, and a small drawer sprang open. The old wood popped, and Alexander jumped. "Looky here," I whispered. "This is where the professor dropped Miss Dabney's papa's watch. Then he jammed it shut right in front of the public, though nobody noticed." A little drawer would spring open and shut at a touch. Alexander liked to wear the gadget out, fooling with it. I crept around the cabinet to find there was no back on it. The bottom of the cabinet was heaped high with various items. The only light came from some gauzy stuff glowing with phosphorescent paint. It looked like Sybil's costume. In this dull gleam, I made out sticks of incense and candle ends and a box of kitchen matches, which I reached for to cast more light on the subject. Alexander had come around to hover behind me. Just as my hand closed on the matchbox, the pile of glowing gauze came alive and twitched. A terrible voice whined, "Here, take your hands off me, you nasty old—" Alexander's high, whistling shriek drowned all other sounds. Fear riveted him to the floor, otherwise I'd have been left alone to face the talking gauze. The matchbox fell on my shoe, and the gauze thrashed around and rose up. I kept my wits about me, but barely. Presently, little Sybil and me were eye to eye. There was blood in hers. It could only be Sybil, and she was earthly to a fault. I'd roused her from a deep sleep, for she blinked. Her forehead glowed with a dab of phosphorescent paint from her drapings. Her hair was the color of old snow. She looked bruised in the blue light, except for a black, wet mouth. As she blinked slack-jawed at me, I saw she was snaggle-toothed. There's something of an old woman about her, but she was so scrawny and shapeless she couldn't have been older than 12. "Who might you be when you're at home?" she inquired in her hollow voice, but it was too late to scare me, and she knew it. Alexander's hushed voice came from over my shoulder. "Oh, Lord in heaven, I will be a good boy if only—" "I'm Blossom Culp," I said, "and this hero behind me is Alexander Armsworth. We represent the law in Bluff City." Sybil swept down for the matchbox and struck a light to a candle knob. "Come off it," she remarked in her odd accent. The letter H seemed to be missing from her vocabulary. "I've seen the law in my time, and you don't look nothing like it." "Be that as it may," I replied, "it's in your best interest to cooperate. If word gets out that you're a human, the law won't be far behind. They'll have you in school before you know it." Sybil and me were nose to nose, with only the candle flame between us. "School?" she said, scandalized. "I never set foot in a school. You won't get me there. Besides, I'm 16. 11. 15, she said. Nearly. 12. Mind your own business, she said. And what if I was to say they'd arrested your Professor Regis, found a certain gold watch on him, and locked him up? I inquired. I'd call you a liar, spat Sybil, because the old I'm going home now, Alexander said. Never was arrested in his life, finished Sybil. With that honey dung of his, he can talk himself out of any tight place. Why, they found a pearl necklace, a silver cigar box, and $42 in cash on him in Vandalia, and he walked away from them. Nobody'll testify against him in court. And just where do you come into all this? I asked, seeing she was talkative. I don't, she said. I sleep in this here cabinet, and the professor and I, we never ride in the same coach on the railway. Nobody can finger me, for I'm the spirit Sybil. Nobody has laid a hand on me during the seance. I'm that quick. Otherwise, I'm nowhere to be seen. We travel at night. I ain't seen daylight in 2 years. You look it, I remarked. You're no American Beauty Rose yourself, Sybil commented. There's nothing like swapping insults to clear the air. I couldn't approve of her shady calling, but she had spunk, and I like that. Well, look here, Sybil, this is no life for a young kid such as yourself. You're in no better situation than a mole. Sybil blinked. In a way, she was a mortal version of Minerva. Nobody had ever had occasion to give her a good talking to. Just how do you live? When all this comes to light, it'll go better for you if you look like an innocent party. Anyhow, not quite the crook you are. I thought she'd sulk, but she said, Crikey, if you want the worst nosy Parker I ever come up against. All right, if you must know, welcome to my happy home. She managed to step out of all the gauze draping and planted a bare foot on the floor. Alexander retreated a couple of steps, but he'd quit praying and was listening. Sybil fixed the candle in a handy bracket on the cabinet wall. Here I sleep, she said, pointing to a pile of rags on the cabinet floor I wouldn't put a dog down on. And just there's my supper. She pointed out an empty can of pork and beans lodged in the corner. And there's the you-know-what. She waved a hand at a china chamber pot. It looked to me like she slept with her head in the beans and her feet in the chamber pot. It was close quarters in that cabinet and anything but clean. There was a water jug, but no soap. She warmed to the task of showing us around her narrow world. There was a flue in the top where the incense smoke rose up, and peepholes on various levels in the front doors. Sybil could scan the crowd out front well before she made her entrance. The whole cabinet was as busy as a Chinese puzzle, and as clever. The entire contraption came apart for shipping. There were other drawers and loose panels fitted to the inside, but Sybil passed them over. Only persuasion made her admit that the secret drawer on the front was where the professor managed to stash items lifted from clients. She showed us how she could gather this swag from the inside. What happened to the loot then, she didn't say. Oh, they had their routine all worked out. It was hard not to admire it. Alexander did. But I needed to know more if I was to break up this act, which I meant to do before the professor and her caused more mischief. Sybil need be no match for me. She had no more supernatural powers than a hand-fed calf. Still, I had unanswered questions. She was reluctant to give away all her trade secrets, so I appealed to her pride. There would be time later for threats outright. Well, Sybil, says I only hope this Professor Regis pays you a good wage. Looks to me like without you he don't have much of an act. Not half, she replied, which I took to be agreement. I could tell from the way she thrust her chin out the professor didn't pay her a thin dime, but I'd planted that seed and moved on. I was in the audience yesterday myself, I said, sitting next to a certain lady well known in the community. The old party in the awful act, Sybil shot back, the one that took a dive at the end? That's her, and it looked to me like you didn't pick her out of the crowd by chance. Sybil smirked. Looked to me like she was a sitting duck for you and the professor. That's right, Sybil preened. Did you know who she was ahead of time? Didn't need to, did I? Said Sybil, swollen with pride. There's one like her in every seance, and usually several. Sticks out like a sore thumb, even without a hat. There's always some old maid anchoring after her dear departed old dad. I seen her through the peephole before I manifested. But you took your time getting around to her. I'm that subtle, Sybil explained. And you knew she was an unmarried lady? That's right. Reached down and touched her left hand where the wedding ring wasn't. And then you signaled across the room to the professor. That's it. I hold up one finger for yes, two for no. The professor's brown-eyed, blue-eyed people with night blindness, but professor's got eyes like a barn owl. That's true about brown-eyed people seeing better in the dark, Alexander put in. Champ Ferguson, he's brown-eyed. We always depend on him when we're out at night. I waited through this interruption and then said, What makes you so sure she had some valuable object on her person, Sybil? In this business, she said, you can tell what people are worth in a glance. She gave me an up-and-down look. And these old maids, they always carry about some keepsake or other. We take in cash money, too. There's several ways of working things. How true, I thought to myself. Well, that about tells the tale, I said carefully, except for that nonsense about the table wrapping. That's the professor's own invention, and he's that vain of it. There's a clapper under the table, and it works on a black thread running to the professor's knee. Then at the end of the seance, he walks away from the table. The thread breaks, and Bob's your uncle. It was time to wind this up while Sybil was still halfway agreeable. She was the shifty type that would turn on you at any time. Still, for reasons of my own, I needed to know a few personal things about her. Say, Sybil, you talk funny. Are you foreign? What's that to you? I waited her out while she gave me a fishy-eyed look. Maybe I am, since you ask, she said, shiftier than before. Me old mum, she as much as sold me to the professor. I grew up in the Bermondsey Road, fast. Where's that? Asked Alexander. St. Louis? It's London, you chump, Sybil growled at him. London, England? Said Alexander, amazed. The same? Where else? And the professor says I have to do everything he says because I'm an illegal alien. But is it true he's astonished the crowned heads of Europe? I asked. Crowned heads? You don't make me laugh. He never played north of Battersea Funfair the best day he lived. He worked for halfpennies in England and had to come back to this ignorant country where people will believe anything they're told. They're that gullible. By then I'd had enough of Sybil. It'd be more trouble than it was worth to get out of her where the professor hid all the stolen items. I figured what he picked up in one town he sold in the next. Anything left over was likely tucked away in the hidey holes of the cabinet. He wouldn't carry it on himself. I knew enough to play Sybil's role at the professor's last seance. But first, I had to get rid of Sybil. Well, it's your life, I said, beginning mild. But while the professor is snug in his fine room down at the Cornhusker Hotel with a hot dinner in him, you eat straight from the can and sleep on rags in the dark. It's a hard life, Sybil agreed, and it'll likely to get harder for you. As I said, Alexander Armsworth and me, we represent the law in Bluff City, and they'll have you up on several counts. Being an illegal alien's a good start. Fraud and larceny is a couple more. Maybe nobody'll testify against the professor out of shame at being bilked, but that won't keep the county court from putting you away. Away? Muttered Sybil. In the reformatory for wayward girls. You're a prize candidate if ever one was. They'll lock you up, throw away the key, and not look for it again till you're 21. Crikey, said Sybil, shrinking. There's just one way out for you. By then I had her eaten out of my hand. Alexander, too. He can never see a minute ahead. You got any money? I know where some is. Sybil's eyes slewed over to the cabinet wall. Take what cash you can find and leave everything else, including them drapings. Clear out before daybreak. That's your only chance. Otherwise, you'll be looking through bars with a number round your neck. Crikey, breathed Sybil again. What if the professor catches me? He'll have me head. Another good reason for getting an early start, said I. I don't know, whined Sybil. Run for your life. There's a milk train through here at 5 o'clock. Then Alexander and me were gone, leaving the spirit Sybil ankle-deep in her cabinet and lost in thought. For a wonder, Alexander got Miss Dabney's Pope Detroit started. I will say he steered it better than its owner. There was gray light in the east as we rolled along Fairview Avenue. Alexander was bright as a button over his newfound skill at steering. He was very brave on the subject of Sybil, too, since I'd done all the negotiating and he hadn't been totally unmanned by fear. Still, he thought of complaints. "Look at here," he said, taking a curb close. "It's nearly daylight. How am I going to keep awake at school? Miss Spaulding, she'll snatch me bald-headed if I doze." "There'll be no school for me or you today, Alexander," I explained. "We have a day's work getting ready for the professor's last séance in Bluff City." "Leave me out of whatever you got in mind," he warned. "You're already in it. It won't do if word got out you'd spent a long night with me instead of at home in bed, whatever your folks think you are." "Common blackmail, Blossom," he complained. "You know no other way. And another thing, since your brother-in-law Lowell Seaforth is a newspaper reporter, it's up to you to get him to attend the séance. We'll want news coverage on this, and plenty of it. I have no doubt Seaforth is always looking for a good story, and if he's anything like most cub reporters, he never knows when to find one. I have him right there. It's as big a story as he's liable to stumble on around these parts." "I don't see how there'll be a séance at all without Sybil," Alexander said. "Crikey," I said in a hollow foreign voice. "There'll be a Sybil, all right." And we'll see how she manages that next time.